Hello everyone, welcome to the Responsible Logistics podcast. Our today's guest is Walter Kusters, Head of Business Development at Nexogen. Welcome, Walter.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Walter, maybe you could tell me a little bit about Nexogen and what its main scope is?
Yes, of course. Nexogen is helping asset-based carriers like Gitega, so companies who have hundreds of trucks driving through Europe, and we help them with the planning and dispatching process. We have planning tools which enables planners to make good decisions which cargo will be executed by which truck. So that's the planning tool. And we have a second tool which we call Fleet Operator, which helps your transport managers to guide the driver. So then we will optimize the route and also all the tasks including in the route. So where to fuel, where to park, where to clean the trailer. And then we optimize, we call it the itinerary on purpose instead of the route. And that way your dispatchers and the drivers know exactly that they do the right execution at lowest cost. And of course taking into account customer requirements, and secondly all the regulations, driver regulations, but also road restrictions and all other things.
And maybe you could explain a little bit how exactly does it work? Because as I understand, you work with carriers who have their own fleet.
Yeah.
So I assume something needs to be installed in a truck and then data will be transferred. Just if you could explain a little bit the principle of work.
Well, it's a very good question because it's on purpose asset-based, because we need the data out of the telematics which is in the truck, because we make detailed calculations about the driver availability, the driving hours, and we need the truck position. And if you have subcontractors or like freight forwarders, US carriers, they don't have access to the telematics because that's protected by the privacy laws, and only asset-based carriers, they have access to the detailed driver information. And next to the telematics, you need of course a transport management system where we can get the order information. So where to load, where to unload, are there specific requirements like the temperature if you transport fish, things like that. And that together, we take the information out of the transport management system, we take it out of the telematics, then we make the calculation for the best assignment or the best itinerary, and then we present the best assignment to your planner or to your transport manager, and they can then accept it, and then the execution can start. So we always work together with a TMS and a telematic system.
Right, but you mentioned that mostly carriers can use these tools because of direct data from telematics, right? But what are the advantages exactly of using these tools?
Main advantage is that it is impossible for a planner to make a manual plan by head if you have more than 100 or 200 trucks already, because there are so many requirements on the customer side and there are so many constraints on the truck, trailer and driver side that you have thousands of possibilities. And if you don't use advanced tooling, then you have a feasible plan, but you never will have the best plan or the optimized plan.
Because also I assume that with automation or digitalization, you can avoid human errors, right?
Yes, but on the other hand, we also say we can automate a lot, but we're still working with people, and that's also nice to work with people. So we try to aim to have an acceptance level of what we propose with our tooling above 90–95%. But we also recognize that sometimes there are good soft reasons that you make a different route or a different assignment. So we try to be realistic in that.
As I understand, the planning tool also helps to reduce empty kilometers, meaning that with advanced planning, you don't have, like trucks don't have to return empty, but it's easier to see the situation and try to avoid it, right?
Yes, with the planning tool, we know when a truck will be empty, and we also know which new loads are in the same area. And when you have only one truck and you are empty in Amsterdam, then it's relatively easy to allocate a new load. But at the moment you are a bigger carrier and you have 20 trucks empty in the north of the Netherlands, then you also need 20 loads. But then you have in theory already 400 combinations. And then we make the calculation of the best 20 combinations of the 20 trucks and the 20 new loads. And that is then presented. And then of course we reduce empty mileage. So most of the time the truck nearest by the next load will get it. But we also look into the driver availability, because some drivers still have 8 hours left to work that day and others only 2. So we also optimize the driver productivity. And if you connect that to sustainability, I think it's not only improving empty mileage, but it's mainly improving the productivity. And with our customers, we increase the number of shipments with the same fleet. So we have a higher productivity, and that's of course greener.
Right, and better for the companies in terms of business as well. Yep. But if, let's say, it's a carrier with, because Girtek is quite a large player with a few thousand own trucks and trailers, but let's say it's a little bit a smaller company, M-sized or S-sized, for example, 10 to 20 trucks, can they also use this tool?
Now, the planning tool, we focus at bigger carriers, and then we say above 300 own trucks. The operator tool, so for the transport managers, that can be used from, we say 100 trucks or more. And most of our customers, they have between 400 and 1,000 trucks. And I agree with Girtek has far more trucks. But the principle is the same, as we try to make the best assignment and we try to make the best execution of the trip. And then you have the same rules, because all the drivers have the same driver regulations in Europe. And you use the same motorways, the same fuel stations, the same parkings. And also many times also the same customers with similar requirements.
But what a carrier needs to have in their scope or within their fleet to be able to use this tool?
As I mentioned in the beginning, you need a transport management system, because we need to have the shipment data digital available. So we must know where to load and where to unload. And we must know the customer requirements. For example, is it TAPA certified, or do you need a certain temperature? Things like that, because then we know you need, for example, secured parking. And on the other side, we need the data out of the telematics. And then we need the driver status and the truck position. And we need to know all the rules you want to apply as a company. How do you want to optimize your fleet? Because people have different business models, and we try to adapt the rules their company has. And to say that practical, we look in the head of the planner and we look in the head of the transport manager, and what they do every day when they make decisions. We try to copy that, and we especially look into the senior ones with already 10 or 15 years experience, and we digitize all the logic thinking they have, we have put in the systems. So it's data from the TMS and the telematics, and it is the business rules, how you want to apply them.
And it also relates to types of cargo, because, for example, one is temperature controlled and the other one is, for example, transported in tote liner, like with curtain side. This data is also considered, right?
Yes, but in the shipment data, it will already be said that you need a temperature control. So then you need a Frigo trailer. But if you have general cargo with fits in a tote liner, that can also be transported in a Frigo trailer, but you prefer to have Frigo. But sometimes when you have an empty leg, then it's also good to have general cargo in your Frigo trailer. And that's what we call the compatibilities. So the shipment has its characteristics, but also the truck and the trailer and the driver have their characteristics. And within Fleet Planner, we're matching that you can combine it. If you go to the UK, you need a driver with a UK visa. If some customers, they want in Germany German-speaking drivers, so then we must know which drivers speak German. So in the planning system, everything is checked, all the requirements and all the possibilities a truck, trailer and driver can deliver.
So a lot of data
Yes.
to be processed. But maybe you could tell me what are the main challenges, because it seems like a great solution for carriers to implement for simplicity, efficiency, and also transparency. But what would be the challenges, for example, in implementing it or processing the information?
Yeah, as you said, we process a lot of data and it's important to have the data. So the biggest challenge is indeed what we call the data readiness. Is all the data available? Because many carriers, they have already a TMS in place for many years. But the TMS was always focused on the financial transactions. So when the job has done, you can send an invoice. And all the operational information which is relevant is many times not in the TMS. It's many times in emails, in text fields. And we see with carriers having an older TMS system that they lack the availability of the data because it's in free text or in emails or in WhatsApp or in Teams. And then we need together with the carrier also to upgrade the TMS system to make sure that all the operational data is also available in the system. The second thing is the change management. Because if you have the fleet planner and fleet operator in place, then the system does all the business rules and the decisions. And as a planner or transport manager, you mainly have to control the decisions. So then you have also then a different way of thinking. Because when you make yourself all the decisions and you check all the constraints yourself, then you know all the details. But if the tool takes the decision, then all the details are in the data and are in the system. And then the planners and transport managers, they have to build trust in the system because they don't check anymore themselves because the system does. And the second thing in changing is with Fleet Planner, we look to all the trucks together. So we make one plan. And many carriers, before they start working with us, they had regional plans. So they had a planner for France, a planner for Poland. But now we make one plan. So then they have to work together far more and to accept that it is one plan, which is best for all.
But probably challenging to also make a change in general.
Yep.
But do you also help carriers with decarbonization? Like, for example, in calculating the emissions, or we touched this topic a little bit already regarding like reduction of empty kilometers, but what other advantages carriers can have when it comes to not digitalization, decarbonization?
Now, of course, we help with them, but it's important to realize we are a planning tool. And next to a planning tool, most carriers have also a business intelligence or a reporting tool. And then after you have done the execution or the trip, then via the reporting you will see all the results. And these results or KPIs will also be again input for the next plannings to improve. But of course we have in the business rules where you aim for lowest cost. We have also rules for aiming for lowest emissions. But with transport they go nearly hand in hand. I think it's more important that due to the sustainability goals, there are more and more rules and requirements, where you need again additional data and you have again additional rules. For example, in the Netherlands there are now the first cities which will not allow any more diesel trucks in 2025. Or you can only enter it with a Euro 6 engine. Or like in Germany, they have now the Maut, but it's free for electric trucks. So maybe if you have electric trucks, you want to send them more to Germany, because then you save Maut. So we helping the planners and transport managers to adapt greener solutions by implementing then also the right requirements and constraints in our systems, so that you still can make the right decisions by having also the new green trucks and green infrastructure.
So do you also help carriers to integrate newer solutions like electric vehicles or alternative fuels, what would be your role in it?
Yeah, our role will be to implement the new business rules and the new constraints and requirements. Like with cargo beam, I mentioned having the green corridors, and you have in the Benelux and HVO trucks. And then we make sure that the AVO trucks will be available in the Benelux. And then we also will check if there are AVO fuel stations. And then we will also include then the refueling of AVHO and make sure that the truck trailer is also on time at the rail terminal. And on the other side, if it goes to Poland, it will be the same. So, and together with the planners, we will discuss how do you, which cargo will go to the green corridors and which cargo will go to the diesel trucks. Because not everyone can go directly to the green corridors because there is still a limited capacity. So that way we help. And the same is with e-trucks. We have now the first charging points, or instead of refueling you have to charge. And then we also try to plan the charging in the system. So we enable the carriers to introduce HVO trucks, intermodal legs and e-trucks, and so that you can also adapt them in your organization. And I think with most of our current customers we are now in a pilot phase, so then it's still a bit isolated. But with the same customers we are now in discussion to discuss the new business rules and to adapt them both in the planned product as in the transport manager product.
But how do you ensure accuracy of data? Because in logistics business, even 1% deviation of, let's say, the driven distance can already make a huge error in general. So how do you ensure the, accuracy?
Well, the official answer is it's the responsibility of the carrier to maintain his data. But by using our tools, we see in practice that when you implement it, it is a challenge, because then you have to collect the data. And indeed, most companies, they miss 5 to 10% of the data. So, but then we make sure together that this data is available. But the good thing is, when you use our tooling, you are also forced to maintain the data, and everyone knows it is necessary. So then there is also a good reason for all the employees to do it, the data entry directly good. And you search together for solutions to make it easier. And like with the refueling, fuel prices are more and more digital available via the fuel providers. And then we make connection with the fuel providers so that we always have the latest fuel prices and that we make the right calculation. And the same is for what we call the point of interest network. So the fuel stations, secure parkings, cleaning stations. We must make sure together that all the points are available in the system, including the right cost. Because sometimes you have two cleaning stations in one city, but one is 10 euro cheaper. Then it's also important to know that it is 10 euro cheaper. Otherwise we make the wrong decision. But you are right, I mean, it's a huge effort to maintain the data, and it's very important to monitor continuously the quality.
And what's the role of artificial intelligence in managing all this data?
With artificial intelligence, things can go faster and even, again, more smart. But I think we are in the beginning of using that. There are a lot of practical examples where you recognize images and things like that. But to use the AI in planning, that's a bit more challenging, because most of our tooling is still based on what we call algorithms. And so then we optimize in a mathematical way. And we are now introducing the first AI things as well.
But what are the investments needed to implement the solution, or let's say integrate it between carrier system and you as a provider?
I think you mentioned already the word integration. So we need to invest together and make the integration work. But the good thing is we have defined standard APIs, so we know exactly what we need. So together with the carrier, the TMS and telematics provider, we will make it happen. Secondly, I mentioned we try to empty the head of the planner and the dispatcher. So we will interview them and ask thousands of questions how they work. And then we will implement the rules in the system. And then we will test it together with the dispatcher and the planner. And then we will roll out. And of course, as we are a SaaS product, we then ask a monthly fee for each truck plant. So then you need a business case, and we will prove together that the value we'll deliver is higher than the cost you pay monthly for the truck. But the biggest investment is the implementation itself, getting all the data and getting all the business rules out of the head of the planners and dispatchers and put it in the system. But we have now quite some experience, and so we know everything about FTL long haul. So we have seen all the tricks and rules, so it's every time going a bit faster and easier.